It is another week of the Workplace Wonder podcast, LinkedIn Live, whatever you want to call this at this point, wherever you're watching this. I do appreciate everybody who watches and listens. And I've been getting some cool emails recently, actually, from people who want to be guests on the show, which is super flattering. So it's been exciting for me. And speaking of exciting, I have a pretty awesome guest today and someone I've gotten to know since late August, since we both joined the same cohort in our doctoral program, earning our degrees in leadership psychology. And I want to introduce to everybody to Mary Polanco.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Blake.
You're welcome. So thank you for joining me. So I have this thing on here where, and maybe this is part of the inclusive leadership stuff that we've learned, but I have this thing on here where I don't ever want to assume a biography. So I prefer people introduce themselves, and so that you can speak to whatever it is that's important to you and that speaks to you currently, unlike a lot of the biographies that we write, that we turn into these things that are like, well, that's a little outdated. I've done more since, or I don't feel the same anymore. So I want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself. Who are you? What brings you here? And what makes you love leadership?
Who am I? The great question, right? I love that you do that. That's so fantastic. So I am Mary Polanco. I hail from Maryland right now, originally from Pennsylvania, but we live in Maryland now. There's a lot to kind of unpack there. The short end of it is a couple years ago, I retired from the United States Air Force. I served for 23 years. And my last assignment was in a leadership position out of the Pentagon, which is why we're in Maryland now, because we just sort of stayed after that. So I've been retired for 2 years, and I am a leadership development trainer, author, speaker, and just sort of figuring out my way and in this new transition for myself and my family in the civilian world, which has been fantastic. I am a hobby crafter. So if you're watching, you can see behind me sort of some craft machines happening. So I am a hobby crafter and sort of my therapy, and I love to do it. I'm a mom to 2 kids. My husband and I have a wonderful 14-year-old daughter and 10-year-old son who keep us constantly busy, especially now with all of the extracurriculars. That's a little bit about me. I'm going to jump right into your last question of my interest with leadership. Yeah. So honestly, I kind of got hit with the bug, if you will, back in 2012 when I was assigned as a leadership development instructor. So we would teach our first line supervisors and our mid-tier supervisors in the Air Force leadership and management concepts. They'd go through like a 4 or 5 week class. And I was an instructor for that course. And I had so many aha moments during that time. I felt like I was cheating because I was learning so much as the instructor, and it just really fueled my passion for it. So I pursued my bachelor's and then my graduate level degree in strategic leadership. And from there, it's just been a lifelong learning process, and I'm here for it.
That is awesome. Yeah, I can totally see how that would plant the bug in you, jumping into that. And then I think the more you dig and the more you learn about the topic, the more interesting it gets. I was listening to a podcast yesterday that Robert Greene was on, and he's all about finding people's passions and purposes in life. And one of the things he was saying is when you finally find that subject matter that interests you, it not only doesn't feel like work, but you almost can't get enough of it. And how you know is that hours and days pass while you're learning about it without you even realizing it.
Yes, I actually said that once when I was doing my bachelor's degree while I was working full time. I think I had just had our son. I'm a glutton for busy. And I remember saying that. I was like, when you pick your degree plan, pick something you really want to learn about, because it's going to be so much easier. Also, with the caveat that acknowledge that, because there were times when I just had to be like, okay, Mary, that's it. Just finish the paper. Like, stop, going down the rabbit hole. So,
yeah. It's funny because I think one of the things that sold me on the program that we're in now was, I want to say it was Dr. Devlin, who's in charge of like the whole program. For those who don't know, obviously you do. She had said, if you love getting on the phone with somebody and geeking out, talking about leadership, then this is the right place for you. And I'm like, okay, I'm in.
Yeah.
And it feels like every paper we have to write, as grueling as they can be sometimes, and we're going through it right now. It's really interesting. It's fun. And it's sort of like problem solving in like an interesting social sciencey type of way.
Yeah. I mean, you'd probably noticed that like our first breakfast together, we weren't talking about our favorite color. Like we were like already diving into why this is so fascinating, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah. True.
No, it's been great. It's been great. So you worked at the Pentagon, and the question that comes to mind is, do aliens exist?
I also get the question, do I have a top secret clearance? They don't tell you anything, even if you have one, just so you know.
Gotcha.
I think they do, but I have well, I mean, didn't they come out with a whole bunch of evidence lately?
Yeah.
Recently? Yeah, so I guess so. I've never seen them though, unfortunately.
Okay. Damn, I was hoping to catch you off guard and get some secret information.
It's so funny how the ideas even I had being a service member of the Pentagon before you get there, and then you walk in, you're like, well, this is the most basic office building I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, I could totally imagine. I think everybody blows it up in their mind, but I think I've heard that before from other people as well. Of people go, you think it's some special thing. I've heard it about the FBI building too, that you imagine it's all this spy work going on and these cool gadgets laying around, and it's just a boring cubicle-based office.
No, building. And if there is an elevator that takes you to the basement where the cool stuff happens, I sure don't know about it. So,
well, there goes my second question. So, you were in the Air Force for 23 years. I mean, that's a huge commitment and huge commitment of your time. How, and this is sort of a loaded question, but obviously that much time within the military and within like their structure system, what has it taught you about leadership, and more specifically, what has it taught you about teamwork that still stands out to you today that you see being able to be applied to the civilian world?
Well, I think, and again, you have to understand I'm coming from a very specific lens because of the rigidity of the military system and structure, the hierarchy of that structure, and why that is beneficial to a lot of the aspects of the mission, right? But what I also have learned about that is that leadership is leadership is leadership. Like no matter where you go, effective leadership essentially carries the same components. So it doesn't matter, the job. And I actually, side note, learned that, and kind of that was confirmed 17 years into my career when I spent a year on Capitol Hill during a fellowship as a staffer. And there was no military around me. I was with all civilians who worked on Capitol Hill. And I was like, oh, leadership is, same. It's the same everywhere, right? So I think that was sort of one of the biggest takeaways as I evolved into this passion for leadership, is that it speaks the language to all organizations. If you understand it and the components that make effective leadership, then you can use that at any level and in any organization. So I think that's been one of the biggest takeaways for me as far as that goes. But specifically military life, there's something you have to learn pretty quickly, and they teach you that in basic training, is that this is not a solo sport. Like there's many careers out there where you can probably go into an office and have your computers and stay there by yourself and work on your stuff. And the military lifestyle, the getting from A to Z, it is not a solo sport. You need to rely on the people left and right to you. And I think that is really important when we talk about team dynamics, because it sets the stage for us. Right away, we're not expected to do anything alone. Now, there are individual aspects of that, of course. You don't get promoted as a team. So, you have to have an individual piece of that effort. But you really have to understand what your teammates are good at, where their areas of improvement are. Like, you have to come together if you're going to work together well to get the mission done. I'm saying that's the premise. I'm not saying that's always the case by any means, full transparency. But again, basic training, they teach you that right up front. And so I mean, I think the importance of and team dynamics. I've been on terrible teams and I've been on teams that have changed my life. And those takeaways have really helped me establish not only my teaching when I'm going through this with other people, but also how I show up on a team. Our cohort is a team.
Right.
And what's my contribution to this team? And so that's always at the forefront,
No, it's an interesting perspective, and it kind of places you in this position where you're always looking at almost every situation, I guess, you go through as a team, even probably your family, right? So like when parenting, you're looking at this as like everything is, okay, I got my strengths, my husband has his strengths, and how do we balance each other out to accomplish the mission of getting the kids to bed or whatever it is, getting through this tough teenage year, whatever it might be. Yeah, I figured. But that's really interesting, and I'd imagine it's a sort of those types of theories, or like that team-based nature that the military has. It stems from survival, correct? Like, so that's really the point, the baseline of it at the most like primal level, is that we're teaching you to be a team so that you guys can have the best chances of survival if you're in a battle situation.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, like, you're right. Like, when we talk about psychology, we always talk about, okay, what's the biology of it? What's the most, I guess, the deepest root of why we do what we do? And you're right. For the military answer to that, it is, this isn't like, like we're not here to talk about war planning, but, it is essentially when you have to think about how different the landscape is these days. I would say that's one area that I've noticed that we need to adjust to the new times of the team dynamic and what that could look like, because you're right. The bare bones of it is we want to survive. We all want everybody to come home. And how do we do that? We do that by looking out for each other. Who's one of the phrases we say in the military is, you got my six, and that's
right.
your 6 o'clock, right? Like, you've got my back. And I think absolutely. And that's what they're trying to indoctrinate us into when we come through basic training, is whatever you had before this, that is not whatever you did by yourself. This is where you need to be able to lean on your teams. But this is where I feel like all organizations could do way better. We can talk about a concept, but if you don't give people the tools and the information and the knowledge of why they should care about that, then it falls on deaf ears for more than half of them.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not building that trust amongst your team, from the top down, if you're not establishing an environment of trust, you can't force that. Just because we all wear the same uniform doesn't mean we want to look out for the person to our left or to our right,
That's a really good point. And I think bringing up the concept of just trust in general, I think that really is what it's about. So we talk about survival. You're learning this for survival purposes, but really, essentially, you're learning this, you're developing trust so that you could survive, so that you know that these people all around me are going to do their part. They're going to protect me. I'm going to protect them. And we trust and have faith in each other.
Right.
And then obviously, as we translate over to companies and organizations, sure, the stakes aren't the same, but the driving factor could be, where it's survival of the company, or in a different sense, it's the thrival of the company, which is not a real word, but I'm going to call it when you use it. It's the thrival of the company, where we have this mission or this task or this value that we're trying to represent to the world, and we're trying to make this difference. I need to trust everybody around me and above me and below me to know that we're going to be able to get this job done together, and that everybody's going to do their part.
Yeah. And I think the great question for every leader is how do you do that? I was working with a client the other day, and I brought up the concept of psychological safety, because he's a leader in his organization. He's a senior leader in his organization. And he asked the question very vulnerably. I love that he asked the question, how do I establish psychological safety? And first of all, I think asking the question, now I'm coming at this from, a coaching perspective, but like asking that question is the half the battle. I feel like the fact that you're curious and you want to understand something means that you're invested in it.
Yes.
So that's like such an important piece I need to share is you got to be willing to ask the questions that make you vulnerable. Why don't my people trust me? Like, seek answers to that question, and you are already halfway there. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, that's a huge recognition to even have of going, wait a second, this isn't working because nobody trusts me. What have I done wrong, and how do I fix this?
Yes.
And I love that. And, I'm sure someone like who's in that position like him probably doesn't appreciate the answer, which is it's going to take some time. There's a lot of undoing to do before you start doing. And it's a tough process. Psychological safety. I think we're in this culture that like we're always looking for, what do I have to do? Where's the light switch I can flip to make psychological safety turn on? And it's not. And even the topic of this week's episode of Workplace Wanderer is creating effective collaborative cultures. A culture doesn't happen overnight. There's no quick solution to a culture. A culture is built over time. And that, so half the battle is certainly recognizing that there's an issue there. And then the other half of the battle is recognizing you're in for that long haul, to know that this is going to take repeated, consistent effort over long periods of time.
Yes. And it doesn't have to feel, it doesn't have to feel daunting, especially when you are, and I think you're right. I think about the culture of how we operate. It's instant. We want to see instant results. We want to see the bottom line. We want to see the metric that tells me we're growing. We want all of these things right in front of us to prove that what we're doing is working. And establishing healthy culture is one of those things that is very difficult to get a quick return on. You can make a massive shift in your climate and you can start to see a shift. You can start to see the pivot. And that is a fact. If you had this awakening of self-awareness as a leader and you operated a 180 from what you were yesterday, the first thing people are going to think is, okay, what's going on here? Right? But if you consistently are that new person, you're going to start to see people invest in what's happening and invest in the change, right? But again, it takes time. And
it takes time.
And I'm not convinced that there is like a quick way to measure this data aside from paying attention and seeing the things that are new that weren't happening before. Because when you look at something like tacit knowledge versus explicit knowledge, right? So explicit knowledge, we're like, we know the things that are easy to say. I know Blake, his background, he shared that with me. These are things that are very simple, right? But the tacit knowledge of your experience and how you've translated your experience and what that can do to benefit our team, that does not come out unless there's safety. Right? And so it's one of those proving the negative things until we can establish that environment that is where people feel like they can show up themselves,
100%. And I think it's one of those things too, where vulnerability begets vulnerability. And I'm like a sucker, like where I always go to with these things is, getting a FaceTime call was just coming in. Sorry. I love thinking about these concepts of going, where does it start? What is the first step a leader can take to say, okay, I'm looking to build an effective collaborative culture. Something's not been right. We're very siloed. We're very competitive here. People aren't happy at work. Our turnover rates are high. What is my first step that I'm supposed to take to start turning this ship around? So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that. What would be the first thing a leader would do? Can you imagine? What's the first action?
Yeah. Well, I think the answer is different depending on if the leader is brand new to the organization or the leader is kind of having this, things aren't going well, I got to make a change. And so my answer differs based on those scenarios. But let's say you are in an organization, you're the leader of this organization, you're seeing a decline, things are not going well, and there's a need for change. I think acknowledging that first step. Second step is if and when you call in a consultant to help you through that process, if you did, the first thing that's probably going to have to happen is that introspection. from the leadership. Like they have to really look at their part in all of this. I know I got called, full vulnerability moment. I got called by my son's school last week because there was an incident. Immediately, my first response was, okay, Mary, pay attention to this. What is it that we are doing at home? What are we like? We need to open up this conversation to make sure that he's working on his emotional control, like, right? So it's the first look here. It's not the defense to stick up for my kid because he's an angel.
Right.
So as a leader of an organization, you really have to start there and say, okay, what is my part in this? Because I am not new. I've been doing this. And that is a vulnerable thing to do. And a lot of people, I feel, are running from that. It's, hey, consultant, come in here and fix stuff for me. Not, hey, come in here and tell me what I'm doing. Help me understand what I'm doing. Give me the tools so that I can sit down and get those answers. Right? That's a vulnerable thing to do.
Very, yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's not. I mean, my example about my child. Oh, that hurt me. Like it hurt inside.
Sure.
Look inside and say, okay, look, what are we? What are we doing? Let's just look and see what our part is in this, and trying to translate that message to him as well. Is you need to take responsibility for your behavior and your actions. Right.
Right. And you can essentially model that behavior by taking ownership of your actions first and saying, here's what I did. Here's what I went wrong. Yes. What did you do wrong? There's a prayer that's used at the beginning of, and I use the term prayer, by the way, sort of loosely, but there's a prayer that's used at the beginning of every 12-step meeting. And it's usually the serenity prayer. Yeah. And it's grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I think about that often in terms of business interactions, of knowing, especially in a leadership position, how can I use that to see, okay, what's my part and what are the parts that I can't control? What are the parts that are outside of me that I didn't do? So it's sort of taking ownership of certain places, but also realizing where your ownership ends and realizing where other people have to do some work or other things have to be fixed. Yes. And you can supplement, grant me the serenity to accept the people I cannot change, the courage to change the one I can, and the wisdom to know that one is me. There's so many different ways that you can use that to recognize your sense of ownership. But it's a great starting point for us, is exactly what you brought up, I think, is that introspection has to occur. Okay, all of this is going wrong. I can't blame anybody else. Like, it's got to start with me.
Yeah, I feel like you slid that new quote in a little too quickly, because that was pretty awesome.
The second prayer, the second version of the prayer. Yeah. That was I didn't make that up. Okay.
That's pretty spot on. And because I am of the belief, though, everything in our life starts with us. So it's not, we're kind of narrowing it down to talking about leadership, which is so important. Life in general starts with us. It starts with that self-awareness of what can I control, what can't I. I am so grateful for the awareness now to know that it's not my responsibility to control things, that I can be a little bit more fluid and I can look at the things that I can control. Mostly it's always me and my behaviors and my actions towards others, which then have a ripple effect that causes impact on them in positive or negative ways. So I think there is that ripple extension we need to pay attention to, but ultimately, what are we doing and for our, like, what's our responsibility in that? So yeah, I love that. I think that's brilliant.
Well, it was you're the one who brought it up, so I'm glad you think it's brilliant.
No, not like that.
No, I'm joking. No, it really is. The conversation led to a great spot. So, yeah. And I think it's so important. Also so uncommon maybe these days as people there's a couple things I'm pulling from what you just said, but it's uncommon these days, I think, for people to first look at themselves in situations. And it's very easy to start blaming others or even redirecting your anger or stress or something at something else going on in the world. Yeah. What I pulled out of what you had said was the, well, now it's gone. So
It'll come back.
For those who don't know, Mary and I are in the middle of trying to write 2 massive papers, and our brains are at max capacity. So
Yeah,
if
I'm just
this
proud
gets
of myself.
derailed,
Sorry,
blame our professors. I was gonna say, if this gets derailed, blame our professors. This isn't our fault.
Yeah, I'm just so proud of myself that I've been pretty coherent up to this point.
You've been great. You've been great. I'm sitting here like, shocked.
I know. It's true. It's true.
There's a couple comments here I want to read off. So Kingsley Scott Jr., he said, trust is the cornerstone for building a strong foundation in the leadership followership house. # building trust.
Yes.
Which I love. And Kingsley, I love the leadership.
Spot on. Kingsley, as always, spot on.
I'm just like, again, a nerd where it's like someone brings up followership and I'm like, yes, I love that. And then Amanda Marino said, good morning. Great conversation. I'm so proud of you both. I am not the person for what you do. I honor it. Oh, I'm assuming if I'm not the person for what you do, I honor it. Sarah Freya said, morning, Mary, I love your room. So the crafts in the back are working out. So
yay, awesome. I love that.
Oh, this was the other thing that that I was going to say was actually the idea. Oh my God, I just lost it again.
No, Blake.
Wait, where were we going with this?
Give us a second.
You said, oh, about cultures. And we've been talking about organizations, but it's not just, well, we're getting there, guys.
Yeah.
It is not just about companies. It's really about the cultures in your life. And it made me think about when we talk about leadership, specifically, I'll speak for myself. When I talk about leadership is that I'm pretty rarely talking about it in terms of company culture or organizational culture. Mm-hmm. I'm actually speaking more about it in terms of every aspect of your life. And most importantly, being a leader in your own life. And look, I work with people day in and day out for the past 10 years who are recovering from a very difficult disease of the mind. And watching them recover is never the work of other people. I mean, yes, other people help along the way, but you need to really make a drastic change in your life. And with those changes come all of this beautiful life ahead of you. Mm-hmm. But you have to become a leader in your own life and say, no more. I am not going to live the way that my family has done for generations. I am making a change right now. I'm not going to continue down this path. I'm going to cut these people out of my life. I'm going to go and do whatever I have to do to make this work. I'm going to be humble and ask for help. There's so many aspects of it that relate back to leadership principles that I think the first place where leadership starts is in our own hearts and on our own minds.
Yes, absolutely. You can hear me okay, right, Blake?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. This is the mantra of my life that ultimately, once I stepped into that mindset, changed everything for me. So about 3 years ago now, maybe 4, I had what I call an emotional breakdown and breakthrough. And in that process, I can look back on it now with so much clarity, but what was happening was I was sort of shedding all of the external ways in which the world thought I should live my life. And I was stepping into my very own definition of what a purpose-driven life meant. And that metamorphosis of sorts was a very difficult process. But in the main message takeaway that I was receiving was you must lead self first. You must prioritize yourself first and make sure that your well-being is the very most important thing on your list of to-dos, because you, Mary, have been leading and living with one hand tied behind your back. You know, all of this in my leadership journey as an airman in the Air Force, I look back on that with fond reflection, because I feel like I really did love the people that I served and the people that I worked with. I did love them and I did care for them. The problem was that my lack of boundaries put them ahead of me all the time, which meant I was depleted, which meant they actually weren't getting the best of me. So in an ironic twist, my servant leadership, which I took to the next level of extreme, was actually hurting the very people I loved because they weren't getting the best of me. They were getting some leftover version. And we're talking like a decade or more of this behavior. So now by the time I'm at, 21 years, I'm completely depleted. I hit a wall. And so that really is something I live by now is you have to take care of yourself first. You have to lead yourself through the discovery that you need in order to make your life purposeful for yourself.
I mean, that's such a beautiful example of it. And you're so right. I mean, there's so many different things to pull from that. But like, again, it speaks to, if we're talking about building effective cultures and collaborative cultures, it starts with you as the leader yourself, of doing that self-reflection and going, am I taking care of myself? Am I seeing the situation clearly enough? Or am I just operating off pure adrenaline for this whole time and just doing the bare minimum and for myself and giving the maximum to everybody else?
Yeah. And you know what's interesting? I have to say, something that we learn as young leaders and something that's reinforced is never be the leader that says, do as I say, not as I do, right? We know that. Like, you're supposed to lead by example. Right. But the one aspect of leadership life that you forget about, and you always, without saying it, you're embodying do as I say, not as I do, is taking care of yourself. Good leaders are always saying, please make time for your family. Don't overtask yourself. Make sure your downtime is downtime. Good leaders care for you. Great leaders embody that, right?
Yeah.
Great leadership shuts off the computer at a certain time and isn't sending emails at 9 p.m.
Right.
Great leadership is going on vacation and unplugging and not letting anyone contact them because they trust their team. So that is one area I feel that we leaders act hypocritically. And it's something that when you break through that and you realize that that example that you're setting is going to be reflected back, good or bad, in your organization, and you can make that change. Wow. Right. Wow. But the how you make that change is, let's bring it back to what me and Blake are saying. You got to do the work. Because when I figured out, oh my gosh, light bulbs, when I was like, why do I sincerely tell my people to unplug and get downtime, and yet I do not do that? Why do I do that? And my answer for me, I don't know if you're interested in it. If you want.
I definitely am interested in this.
Sure. My answer for me, and everybody's answer is going to, be different, was because I was so afraid of what they would think of me or who I would be to them if I wasn't available at all times, that I steeped my identity in my people pleasing. I was the person who would put the cape on and come save the day regardless of the time of day, right? If I took that away, who was I? I was nobody, what I thought, right? And so until I started to peel back that onion and say, Mary, that's not true at all. In fact, you're going to strengthen them and yourself by establishing boundaries, by being clear about who you are and what you bring to the table and stepping into your own. But before that, that was the reason why I couldn't do it. I was so afraid that people would think that I wasn't worthy.
What was it like for you? Okay, first of all, this is all very relatable. So I understand this. And if Sarah and Amanda are in here, I'm sure they're relating to it as well. They work with me. Very much so. I think we're very good at telling other people to take care of ourselves. But you brought up a really very good point of sometimes the do as I say, not as I do. And you can follow through with 90% of what you're saying, but there's that one piece in terms of self-care that we tell everybody to take their breaks, use their vacation, take time for themselves. And we just very rarely do it for ourselves. And it seems like we leaders, I think you think there's like that shame and guilt of saying, I can't take time for myself. People need me and I can't leave them. And you almost feel like it doesn't apply to you as a leader when it's actually probably most important for you as a leader. And I think about it in terms of something you're probably familiar with at this point is the cognitive and affective trust. And, one of them is basically developing trust based on what people say. And the other one's based on their actions. And as we've learned, the one based on actions is much more important in the long run.
Yep.
Is because there is that there's consistency, or not lack of, there is consistency between what's being said and done. Yep. And that's how you build trust.
Yep.
But I'm curious for you. So as somebody, and again, I relate, I'm a people pleaser, and it's something I've really strongly tried to work on myself. But do you remember the first time where you were like, wait a second, I'm people pleasing right now, or I'm about to people please. I'm going to say no to this, or do you remember what you felt like leading up to it and how you coached yourself through that process?
Yes. I personally kind of broke before I had that awareness, though. And so in my despair, when I was just cognitively not functioning, I mean, just to paint a very small picture, I was a very high performing service member. I got to the highest rank in the enlisted side, and I was at the Pentagon in a high level position. And so history would show you that I had some sense about me to, get there. At this point, though, that I was already during that time frame, I could not do more than 2 productive things a day. I constantly had to sit down. I was lightheaded. And this was days and days and weeks and months of this. And so I was sort of shutting down. It was like I had ignored myself for so long that my body was basically saying, well, we've been trying to contact you about your car's warranty, but we've been trying to tell you, Mary, for the longest time that you are not resting. And so we're just going to do a quick reboot. So you just sit there, be quiet, let us do what we need to do. And then as I was starting to reboot back, I do the work and identify, and I sought therapy. And I started to understand that separation of who I really am versus who I was being in order to be worthy. And that's when I started to understand the power of boundary and no. It's not always no, but during that time frame for me, everything had to be no, because I just had to figure out how to function again. And it was the greatest gift of my entire life that I went through this, because my first huge no was a promotion opportunity. At this point, 21 years in my career, I had never said no to a growth opportunity in my career ever. But I was already at the highest rank. However, there was a positional promotion that was next. And that was what everyone assumed that I was going to go do next. Everyone had everyone, but like my people that knew me had this sort of pathway, established. And I just remember my first thing, it wasn't even a full no. It was like, hey, boss, which I was terrified to talk to him.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. What was it like emotionally?
Terrified. I think I was so nervous, but I was also so clear on you have to do this. Like you have no choice at this point. You would be putting everyone at risk if you pursued this. So I went to him and we got to pull my name from consideration for this next thing. I just am not in the headspace, and I just can't do it. It wouldn't be good for me. Wouldn't be good for my family, or it wouldn't be good for the service either. And so he was so gracious and so compassionate. And he was like, absolutely, like whatever you need, there's always next year. Well, when I tell you, Blake, I walked out of that meeting with this epiphany. First of all, the 80-pound rucksack proverbial came off my back. I just could breathe. But I came away with this awareness of like, oh my gosh, I just made a decision for myself. And it was based on my own value, and it was based on something I was pulled to say. And I think I'm going to do this more often. And then from that point, it just snowballed into, okay, what are you asking me? Does it align with what I'm trying to do? No, easy. No, can't do it. Sorry. And moving on. Instead of steeping that no so heavily into who I am and my identity, which I did for 20 years. What if I say no? I'm going to lose the opportunity. They're not going to rely on me anymore. I can't throttle back. I got to keep going.
Yeah.
So that was my first big no. Yeah.
Yeah. And I can imagine it being terrifying, and it's hard. You feel like you're going to let people down, but it's never as scary as it turns out to be, the actual situation. And I think why it worked out so well for you was how vulnerable you were with your why of, I am not in the headspace to do it. Instead of trying to come in with excuses or make up reasons, you were very honest and said, I'm not mentally prepared right now for this.
And I don't know, I can't speak for the conditioning. I think it depends on cultures. It depends on your upbringing and also the culture of the organization or your career path. I can only speak for the military culture, but it's very much, if you are standing still, you're not doing anything. Like you need to be progressing. What's next? Mm-hmm. Like, I'm not kidding. You'll get in a job, 2 weeks into the job, somebody will be like, well, what's your next move? It's like, well, can I exist here for just a minute? No, because in your mind, you're conditioned to keep going. We are also conditioned very much so to put a Band-Aid on stuff, because quite literally, you have to get back in the fight if we're in combat. Like we all learned the basics of patching each other up, because if we can patch you up enough to get you back in the fight, then we're good. We keep moving, right?
Right.
The problem is we don't know how to separate that mindset. And so when we are not in war, there's not a threat imminent to us. We are doing that mindset over and over again. And so I was very surprised at myself during that time that I wasn't like, Mary, just suck it up and move forward and take the job promotion, do what you're supposed to be doing. But I think the reason I didn't was because I had been doing that for at least 15 years. And I think that was the wall. It was, it's not working anymore. And I want to add something.
Sure.
You said the expectations of people, you don't want to let people down. I promise you, one of my very first thoughts when I said, I just made a decision for myself was, and people who love me still love me. Like, they didn't go anywhere.
Right.
They didn't go anywhere. And that fear that you're going to let someone down and they're going to abandon you is real and palpable. But my reality was the people who love me will always love me. It doesn't matter that I'm not checking a box.
I love that. It's like it's easy to make hard decisions if you're loved. Mm-hmm. And that makes a ton of sense. There is a sense of safety that comes along with that. And you can make courageous steps and do hard things when you know that in the end, you're going to remain loved by the people in your life. Yeah. So that's really powerful. I love that. So, thinking along those lines, there's a few things that came up for me. And I like that although you were in a leadership position, you decided to take the lead in your life, like we talked about before. So kind of just a quick callback to that we were talking about how it's up to us to make those changes. I think it has important implications too, in terms of creating collaborative cultures, eventually in the end, in terms of even just making a cultural shift, is that you don't necessarily always have to be in a leadership position to start making changes as well.
Right.
And some of the best team players aren't in leadership positions, but they're people who just decided to say, hey, this isn't working for me. I'm going to start acting a little bit different, or I'm going to bring some charm to this, some charisma. I'm going to motivate. I'm going to bring people together. I'm going to be authentic. I'm going to be vulnerable and see what happens. And then from there, you can actually improve the culture. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't always have to come from this place of, well, I'm doing this for a position increase. I'm doing this for a promotion. I'm doing this for more money. I'm doing this so this culture that I work within at a minimum 8 hours a day is going to be better and more suitable to my mental health and well-being, and for the mental health and the well-being of the people around me. The other piece of what you had said was that I thought was really interesting. Wow, my brain is just not working today.
I have something to say while you're thinking.
Please do. Well, this is going to be the worst episode of this podcast ever. I'm sure it's entertaining for whoever's watching, because they can see that we're laughing about it. But my God, whoever's going to be listening to this is going to be like, where is this going?
I say don't cut anything.
I'm not editing. I don't edit at all.
This is great, because I think this is the reality. We truly, I think that is a show of how authentic this conversation, real talk. our brains are fried. We're human. Like we're trying.
Yeah.
So something came to mind when you were just saying that, about showing up and being inspired to be your best there for your own mental health. The quote about, or the encouragement about forgiveness, and how forgiveness is not about the other person, it's about freeing yourself.
Right.
That really kind of translated to me what you were saying is you can be in a culture that is not feeding you the environment for happiness, joy, fulfillment. You can be in, if you find yourself in that environment, because not all of us can just up and quit. Oh, right. We have responsibilities. So the fear of us staying or leaving is real. But if you find yourself in that environment, what Blake suggests is so spot on. It's reevaluate your purpose there in that space and how you could make it more enjoyable for yourself in the interim. Also, while simultaneously diving into a little bit of your introspection, so you can be in a space that also reflects what you're trying to do. I think that's so important for us to remember. But yeah, you can shift culture. The lowest person, the newest hire can shift the climate immediately in an organization.
100%.
That's
How
what
many
makes
times have you been in an organization where somebody, you're like, if it wasn't for that person, I would have left a long time ago.
Yes.
But there's somebody there who takes good care of you, or that just makes you happy or brings you joy each day, or whatever it may be. We've all had those people, and maybe we've been those people at some point in people's lives where they just, I think about the Miami Heat down here, and I think I mentioned this before in another episode, but there's a player who was never that good. He was sort of an average player, but he was on the team, and now he's coaching for 20 years, I think. Mm-hmm. And he was always called the MVP of the locker room because it was like his people skills, and he was so able to motivate and bring people together. And that's what made him so valuable to the team, that they never wanted to leave him to leave. Yes. He was so valuable. And the ownership had the foresight to see that this is someone that we can't let go of, because they make our culture.
Yes. We must stop measuring ourselves apples to apples with other people's skill set. There's only one you. And the one person who should know what you bring is you. And when you tap into that and you show up inspired, it's like if you are an Excel queen, right? You know everything about Excel. Get excited about that and then share it and watch what happens. Watch the leadership ripple happen because of that thing. It doesn't have to be people skills. It could be something that you're showing up inspired to do, then inspires others. And I think that is so key. What a great example about the MVP of the locker room, because his ripple of impact is huge for them. Yeah. Probably directly contributed to their wins.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Right. Your sense of satisfaction at a workplace based on someone else's skills and you doing your part and having your skill. I mean, all of that stuff is just crucial. Yes. And it's so changing. And again, it doesn't have to come from someone who's in an official leadership position. No. The other piece, and I actually took a note. I'm taking your lead. I took a note here of what the thought was that I forgot before. And it was a bad habit that I've had for a long time was, and I'm going to blame Jim Carrey for this. So Jim Carrey had a movie, Yes Man, where he was sort of this no man and said no to everything up front. And then eventually had this epiphany, went to this conference where some guy like instilled in him where he couldn't say no. And he said yes to everything, every opportunity. And it was just a reflex. Yes. And eventually it leads to an imbalance in his life. And it's just as bad as when he said no to everything. Mm-hmm. And he had to learn to find that balance between yes and no. What I think about is that for a while I had become a yes person, and it transitioned from me trying to people please, I think, to a reflex, like how Jim Carrey had, where he couldn't stop himself. Yeah. Yes. And it became a reflex to say yes. And it took time for me to realize that, like, I don't have to make decisions in the moment. And I need to take time to decide exactly what you said. Does this align with who I want to be, with my purpose? Before I make that decision, yes or no. And that for me was a very important realization, that I don't want to be somebody who says no to everything right up front because I'm too tired, or I feel like I can't handle it. Because maybe I am tired in that moment and I couldn't handle it in that moment, but give me a day or two of rest, or allow a weekend to pass, and I would love to do that opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't want to miss out on things based on reflex, or you don't want to also take on too much based on reflex, or things that aren't aligned with who you are.
Right.
So that yes and no piece, I don't know. Again, it just comes with that further introspection of being able to be mindful in the moment and saying, "Hey, I that's a great opportunity. Let me think about it. I'm going to think about whether I want to do it or not."
Yeah, and I also think too, giving a space for depends on. I think, okay, let me back up. I think what you just described is where I hope everyone to be, because my immediate like, "Hey, Mary, you got to take a knee and you got to say no for the meantime," was because I had hit such a burnout, such a traumatic burnout. And then I've found the pendulum swing right to the middle. And I think that's ideally what you're describing is where I would like people to go, because I think when you do it that way, you can avoid that hitting the wall burnout. And so I do want to just make space for people who maybe feel like they can't even muster the energy to think about, is this a yes or no, that they need a break. And I want to offer, grace to those people. Say, yes, take the break. You'll know when you're ready to have the mental capacity and bandwidth to think through the yes or no. But for now, don't fear lack. Don't fear missing out. Just recover, essentially. And then, so I wanted to just kind of make a space for that. If you know what I mean.
That makes sense. That makes perfect sense. And I think the irony of this is that once you stop maybe saying yes or no to everything as well, and then you kind of, like you said, the pendulum swings and you can find the place to take space. I think eventually, once you get better at aligning with who you're meant to be and your purpose, eventually you are able to be more reflexive. And it kind of comes full circle, and your yes or no reflexes are going to be spot on, because you've really, by saying yes or no in an intentional way over time, you're recognizing what serves you and what doesn't.
Yes.
And then it becomes easier and easier to recall.
That's it. That's the answer right there. So I hope everybody was taking notes.
Yeah.
That's it. So to illustrate an example of what you're saying is that when I was coming back and having clarity, I established my values. I established what I wanted to measure every decision up against, because this is what matters to me. I had neglected to understand what mattered to me for so many years because I just did what people said was the next thing to do. So I had this list, and this is clear, Mary, these are your values. That opportunity to progress in position came up, and I looked at it, and then I compared it, and I was like, oh, that's an easy no. Like that, I can actually label that an easy no, because it would be a betrayal to myself if I were to say yes to that. And so I think you're spot on. When you have that clarity of what should align, then your decisions are so much easier, and they're much quicker. You get to them much quicker based on that. So yeah.
This has been great. I hate to say that we're coming towards the end, but we sort of are here. So the a couple of things I'm pulling away from it, and if we bring it back to the topic and sort of wrap it up, and I'll see if I can pull what we've said throughout this past hour. The creating effective collaborative cultures. One is trust, right? We discussed building trust. Two is taking time to build trust and recognizing that it's not an overnight process. That psychological safety you mentioned takes time to build. Three is this process of building a culture begins with ourselves, and taking time and space and doing whatever we have to do to take care of ourselves is of the utmost importance.
Yes.
And then the teamwork piece that you talked about earlier, of once that trust has been established, understanding each other's strengths and weaknesses or areas of opportunity, and knowing how we can all fit in like a puzzle piece, like a puzzle, and how we can build towards a mission or towards a goal as an organization with the help of each other and collaborating in that way. And then I guess the last thing that I had pulled from what we talked about that I'm going to remember is we talked about the military's the training's purposes are for survival, and how that can be translated over to an organizational culture. The training for survival is for you to learn to trust the people on your left and right, and how to take care of each other's well-being and physical health, of course, but I'm sure other things as well. But translating that over to a goal-aligned purpose for an organization and getting everybody to go from survival focused to thrival focused, of being able to say, okay, this is what we're shooting for. Let's all get aligned on this mission. How do we do this together so that we have each other's back in this process, and we make up for each other's weaknesses, and we emphasize each other's strengths?
Yes. Brilliant. Yes.
Yeah. Anything else you want to add to that we talked about, or maybe pieces that we missed? By the way, if we go over a few minutes over, unless you're on a time constraint, it's okay.
I would be remiss if I did not mention the best team ever that I worked on. Just briefly pulling from what you just said and adding to that, one thing that was a theme of this team that I worked with was we saw each other's strengths as opportunities, not as threats. We knew each other because trust had been built, that when we know that person's the fastest out there. We had a guy who was the absolute fastest runner on our cadre, our instructor team. And the guys to his left and to his right knew they didn't stand a chance, right? But they lined up every single time next to him because they wanted to run with the best.
Right.
I guess they labeled me as a good writer, grammar was, sort of my thing. So one of my teammates sat with me and learned from what I was doing. He started off self-IDing as the worst writer ever. He left teaching classes on grammar. So we did not use those things as threats. We did not feel threatened. We really grasped onto them as, wow, what a gift that I'm going to be in the same room with someone who's good at this, that, and that. And that is, I think, what really makes the collaborative effort of a team become magic.
Wow.
So that's the thing I would add.
What a special way, too, to think about imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is typically comparing ourselves to other people and feeling like we're not good enough or we don't belong within that team, right? That we don't have the tools to up to the same par as everybody else. And that's a really cool way to think about kind of shifting a mindset, which, by the way, that's reminded me of something else. Mindset. I'm going to write it down.
Write it down.
That was something I was going to say earlier about it. Of the shifting of the mindset of I'm not good enough, to look at these opportunities that we have of these people's strengths, and look how much I can learn from Mary's grammar and writing skills, and look how much I can learn from how fast this person is, and like how faster I can get just by being around them and racing them. That's such a cool way to think about that. It's that everybody's an opportunity, and everybody presents to you as an opportunity. And you just reminded me actually of I never understood this. My cousin, who's very successful in business, early on in my business life, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, said to me, look at every single person in your life as an opportunity. And I thought at the time where my head was at was, well, that seems like I'd be taking advantage of people. And I kind of wrote it off. I'm like, he doesn't get it. And now I think I finally, 10 years later, I got to call him. I think I understand what he was saying, is that everybody has an opportunity to teach you something.
Well, yeah. And you also translated the intent to something that aligns with who you are, right? So he could have meant something else, but you're seeing that phrase now through the eyes of someone who is collaborative and someone who wants to grow and learn and can drop your ego at the door so that you can be teachable. Like that's who you are, And so, yeah, that's an epiphany for sure.
It's interesting. The other thing I'll say is the mindset piece. So I was thinking about it earlier in terms of us saying sometimes that we're always in this place, this sort of growth mindset, right? And that's what we're taught about, is this growth mindset. We want to have a growth mindset, and it's really important, I think, for everybody to develop a growth mindset. However, it's also important to know when to have a fixed mindset and to know when to slow down and when to stay still and when to kind of switch between the two. I don't think you have to become one and stick with that forever. I think you need to learn when to turn one off and turn one on, when it's time for growth and when it's time to stay fixed.
Ooh, that's interesting. That's a new spin, and you've got my wheels turning. I think as you were talking about it, here's what I'm thinking. If you are constantly in the growth mindset phase, like this is like that's all you're doing, that's exhausting. Because not only, and you have to be very careful about how you're talking to yourself as you're learning. Because if you're growing and you're learning things and you get corrected and you get told, don't say that, that was stupid or whatever, then if you're constantly not taking, or if you're not taking the time to, like you said, sit still with that and have the mindset of being your very best friend instead of your worst critic, that could really exhaust you. So I really appreciate that you added that context. Yeah.
Well, I just made up a new theory now. Okay. That's a new mindset. It's a road trip mindset. Let me explain.
I think I'm there, but I want to hear it.
Okay. So you go on a road trip. Let's say you're going on a whatever, it doesn't matter at the time. So you're going a cross country road trip. And along the way, you have stops. So you're moving towards a new destination is the growth mindset. And then once you get to your destination, you don't just stop for a second and keep driving to the next one. You stop and explore for a little while, and you take on a fixed mindset in the big picture, but a growth mindset while you're in that location. So you're taking advantage and trying to figure out what is the most I can do and see in this place on this stop on my road trip, and then before moving on to the next one. Mm-hmm. So it's like a fixed big picture and a growth big picture, but you're kind of making the most of it. So that during your growth, the drive of the growth portion, you're sort of reflecting on your experiences and everything you've learned and what you want to do. Yeah. And you're thinking about where to go next. Then when you get there, you slow down, but you learned to become the best, or you make the best of the situation you're currently in, the location you're currently in.
We can build it out for sure, because I have to tell you,
it's a working model.
It is. I think I'm stuck on the word fixed. I think that has too much of a negative connotation. So you're re-identifying it or redefining it is really helpful. Also throw in the word pit stop somewhere, because I feel like that should be it.
Ooh.
That's great.
Okay, I like that too. You know what? I'm actually a big believer in changing some of the words that we use. Yes. There's certain things that I think that just people are adverse to. And I think as much as we want to change meaning behind words and show people that it can have another meaning, I think no matter what, it's just ingrained in our culture. Certain words have certain connotations. So it might mean having to change certain things. That's like what I think about soft skills. I hate that. I hate that term, because nobody thinks of soft as a good thing unless you're talking about a pillow or a mattress. Right. Nobody thinks it's a good thing.
Right.
Or soft skin or something like that. But to me, it's people skills. How do we change that to let people know that it's not a soft skill?
How does something so essential get labeled soft? That's what I don't understand. Like I agree with you. Yeah, I agree. It's like, you know what it is? Because we have software and computer, and it's not necessary for the function of the computer. And so when we equate both of those, now we're saying soft skills, it's not essential to you actually leading, quote unquote. No, it is. It should be part of the CPU. So, and I'm not techie at all. So for those of you who are like,
I'm just baffled. Did you just make that up? That reason, or did you? I never would have thought about that, but that's a great comparison.
Yeah, just made it up. But right. And so now we've made them in the same space, and they're totally different. So I'm with you. I am on team movement. Get rid of soft skills.
All right. And we'll get rid of fixed mindset as well. And we'll call it something else.
Yes. Man, we're changing the game here today, Blake. I'm just saying.
Well, just expect a graphic coming from me later. That's going to be a whole roadmap theory. It's going to be posted on LinkedIn by later today, I'm sure.
Get your paper done first.
No, that's all the Canva stuff that I do and all these little things that I make that's just pure procrastination.
Yeah.
It's I literally, when I can't do my paper, I just jump onto Canva and start creating something. I know. Then it helps me get to where I want to go, though.
No, you're right. You're taking your pit stop.
I'm taking a pit stop. Wow. So like a mindfulness pit stop. So pit stops are where you ground yourself in the now. So you're not This is great.
I'm geeking out. I'm geeking out.
I was going to say it could be our next book, but before we say that, I want you to highlight, before we jump off, your book, the Final Debrief.
Oh, well, thank you. Yes.
Do you have a copy near you? I want people to see it.
Oh, I just happen to.
Oh, how did this fall right into my lap?
Yes, this is my book. Just released. It's called Your Final Debrief. It's a book, sort of like a self-help, if you will, but also memoirish. I spend a lot of time talking about my own experiences, but it's essentially helping members of the military service transition from active duty or reserve status into civilian life. And one thing that I really try to capture, and I kind of alluded to it here today, is the unmentioned psychological and emotional transition that happens, that if we don't give it its airtime, could really lead to devastating effects of a loss of identity, a lack of belonging, which then could really hurt folks. And so although this book is geared toward military members and their families, I also do talk a lot about the idea of transition in and of itself and what those milestones mean for us. And so, yeah, my hope with the book is that we continue this conversation so that no veteran ever feels alone in the process, because you're going from a very rigid type of environment where you're told what to do, when to do it, and you have a team of people around you, to full autonomy in your life. And that can be very scary. And it's a vulnerable thing to say that's scary. And so, yeah, that's just the hope with my book for folks.
I love it. And I love the title and the discussion about transition and thinking about your final debrief. It has there's a sadness to it, but there's also an excitement. And, you're moving on to the next steps. And I don't know, I'm excited to read it. Like I told you many times, I'll be reading it in a couple weeks as soon as I'm done with all these other books we have to read. Before we start the next ones. So thank you. I'm very excited for that. And then also another little a book tip for anybody, a book recommendation for anybody who's listening. I have another one that I have not started, but it's written by people that I very dearly respect. It's anybody who's familiar with Yes Theory on YouTube. Great group of guys who basically decided that they are going to say yes to life, not in the way that we talked about before, but much more in a seeking discomfort is their motto. So they're going to get out of their comfort zone. They're going to speak with as many people as possible. They're going to go to places and go to countries that everyone demonizes, and to go see the humanity in it. And they're going to have experiences with strangers. They'll invite strangers to go do crazy things and have fun with it. And it's a very heartwarming YouTube channel, but they just came out with their book, which I think arrived today, called Talk to Strangers. And it's about the creation of Yes Theory, but also about the actual theory behind it of not prejudging others before you actually have a conversation with them, and being willing to be brave and go speak to strangers and learn about other people so that you can further develop yourself.
Yes. Get curious.
Yeah. So first, go read Your Final Debrief, everybody. Next, go read Talk to Strangers by the Yes Theory guys. I think you'll enjoy both of them. I know I'm going to enjoy it. I can't wait to read your book. I'm so excited about it. It's been sitting right next to my bed this whole time, so I'm ready to read it.
Thank you, Blake.
Any final debriefs for anybody who's watching or listening?
Oh, don't give me the mic. No, thank you. I think we said a whole bunch here today, and this was so inspiring. You filled my cup today, so thank you, Blake.
Awesome.
And thanks for having me here for this. This was just fantastic, so thank you.
No, thank you. I appreciate you coming on. I love it. I love, even though that I'm going to speak for myself again. Even though I was very all over the place and forgetting things, very forgetful today, I think it was an awesome conversation.
Agreed.
And very authentic conversation, which is what we're going for. So thank you, everybody who listened live. And this will be also living on all the different podcast platforms in about 3 weeks from now. So Mary, thank you again.
Thank you.